Hello and welcome Year 6. My name's Miss Vickers and I am one of the science teachers here at Waterhead Academy, and today I'm going to show you a science experiment that you could have a go at home. So something that Year 6 children are often really excited about when they come to secondary school is the chance to have a go at some investigations and some experiments in science. And this is one that I'm going to show you that you can try at home. So what we're going to have a look at is something you might have heard of called acids. So I've got an example of an acid you'll be using at Waterhead Academy next year, which is called hydrochloric acid. So you may have heard of acids, but you might not have heard of the opposite of acids, the chemical opposite, which are called alkalis. This is an alkali here, sodium hydroxide. Okay, and we'll come back to talking about that in a minute. Now what I'm going to do is make something called an indicator that will show me whether a substance is acid or alkali. Because you might have noticed that both of these are actually colourless. We couldn't tell straight away which one is which, but we can if we use an indicator. Now, indicators always contain a dye, and there are lots of foods which we can actually make indicator from because they contain a dye or a pigment. And the one I'm going to use today is red cabbage. So if you have any red cabbage at home, this will work really well, but it will actually work with other fruit or vegetables of a similar colour, like beetroot or even some berries will work as well as an indicator. So I'm going to put some red cabbage into this container here. This container is called a conical flask, but you can use anything you like at home to make this indicator. So there's my red cabbage, and what I'm going to add is some recently boiled water. So make sure you get an adult to help you do this part, because obviously hot water can be quite hazardous. I'm going to pour that in there, and you can probably see that colour, that dye, is starting to come out of the cabbage and into the water. And that should work really, really well as this indicator. There we are, okay. Now, before you start to test out some things to see if they're acids or alkalis using this indicator, you'd want to do two things. Firstly, we want to leave that to cool down. We don't want to use it right away because the water is really, really hot, and it will give the cabbage time to let that pigment soak into the water as well. So you'd want to wait for that to really cool down. So I've got some that I made a bit earlier on. Okay, and that's really cold now. The other thing I'm going to do before I start to do any testing here is put on some safety glasses. And we use these in science to protect our eyes from any chemicals that might be hazardous or dangerous to sensitive parts of your body like your eyes. So if you have some, then that is great, but otherwise just take real care when you're doing this. Make sure you wash your hands and things like that so that there's no chance of anything getting in your eyes. So with my indicator, I thought I'd first of all just show you exactly what happens when you put it in an acid like hydrochloric acid and an alkali like this sodium hydroxide. You won't have these at home, but I'll show you what we're expecting to see from an acid and an alkali. I'm going to do that in some test tubes, and this here is a test tube rack. Here are my test tubes. And if you don't have these, you can use any container when you do your experiment, okay? But I'll just use these to show you what we're expecting from an acid and then an alkali. So first I'm going to carefully pour some of this hydrochloric acid into my first test tube. And you can see that it's colourless. Now, when I add a little bit of my red cabbage indicator, I'm expecting to see a different colour here. Let's see what we observe. And you can hopefully see the colour a bit better if I hold up this tile behind it. So it's gone from being purple to being quite a nice bright pink in the acid. So we're expecting our purple red cabbage indicator to turn pink when it's in acidic substances. And now for the alkali, let's see what that does. Here's my sodium hydroxide, a really common alkali that we use in school. And that's gone into a different test tube. So again, it's colourless at the moment, but let's see what happens when we add some red cabbage indicator using this pipette. Wow. So you can see straight away that that's not stayed that same purple at all. It's gone a really bright green when we put it into an alkali. There we are. So that's an acid and an alkali that I've got, easy access to here in school, but I've thought of some chemicals that you could have a go at this, you could have a look at home. So now we're going to try testing out some things that you hopefully will have around the house. The first thing that you could collect and try out with your red cabbage indicator would just be some water straight from the tap and see how the red cabbage indicator affects the water. So let's try that one now. Right, so you might notice that the red cabbage indicator hasn't changed colour when it goes into the water. And that actually indicates that water isn't an acid or an alkali. It is what we call neutral, where it isn't an acid or an alkali, okay? We say that water is a neutral substance. So I'll put water here into my rack. And next, let's try out some vinegar. So you may have some vinegar at home that you could try this with. And again, like I say, you don't need to do it in test tubes. An ice cube tray works really well, or you could do it just on some little plates or anything else that you can find. So there's my vinegar, and let's add some red cabbage indicator to that. Okay, now the colour change we've got here is just like one that we did earlier. This one here, can you remember what that one was? That's right, it was the hydrochloric acid. So vinegar is an example of a household item that is actually an acid. And we can see that because it is also turned pink in that indicator. So let's try one more. And this is another thing that you may have around the house, and that's washing powder. So all I've done here is mix some of that washing powder with some water to make it into a liquid. And I'm going to place that in to my test tube, ready to be tested. So let's put in some red cabbage indicator to this washing powder and water mix and see if we see any colour change. Oh, wow. I think you can see straight away that that has changed to a really bright green. And do you remember what green meant with this indicator? That's right, it means it is an alkali. So washing soda, which you find around your house, washing powder, that's an example of an alkaline substance. And vinegar was an example of an acid. Then we tested water as well, which is actually neutral, meaning it's neither acid nor alkali. So I hope you've enjoyed having a go at this science experiment today with our red cabbage indicator. Thank you very much for joining me, and we really look forward to welcoming you at Waterhead Academy in September. Bye.